It's a red panty night for Penny Wong, that's all I can say.
Hi, I'm Andy,
And I'm Roger,
and welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics.
on our search to find the middle.
We're going to give you last week's news today.
It's a slogan, we should put that on a t-shirt.
Stop touching her!
I am tonight announcing my candidacy.
Taylor Swift. Look, my biggest issue with marriage is that I think that it's a fundamentally flawed institution that is built on the oppression of women.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny.
Having truly rational conversations about controversial issues is risky these days.
Roger.
Andy, how you doing?
Pretty good. Did you watch The Red Wedding last night?
I watched parts. It was a bit too gory for my taste, much like the original. What did you stay up and let Mr. Green take you through the blow-by-blows?
Well, I did just want to find out the result, but once I sort of knew that Peter Dutton would not be forming a coalition government, and it was pretty clear what the outcome was going to be. I don't know, these things these things are more fun to watch when it's like, I don't know, I've said it wasn't very early on. So let's cut through all of that stuff though. Let's get straight to the point, right? How do you feel about the election result? Just for anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, or those in other countries, just had an Australian federal election to elect our Prime Minister and government, and the Albanese Labor government was re-elected in quite the landslide. A very strong, well, I don't want to say endorsement, we'll come to that in a moment, but certainly an increased majority.
Yeah, from an electoral standpoint, a bloodbath.
Yes,
right?
very, very strong, a very strongly positioned government. Quite the repudiation of the kind of, Trump style sort of, if you like, politics that, exists not just in America, but some other parts of the world.
Okay, going back to your question, how do I feel? Now, look, I'll start off by saying that this shouldn't be coloured to the fact that I am aligned with any parties, because quite honestly, we probably care more about the US election than we do about the Australian election, albeit that we live here. But I would say that a general sense of gloom, and I must admit, maybe a general sense of feeling a little bit disheartened, or the fact that this kind of walloping was slightly undeserved. And I'll say that that on the side for the coalition, that they didn't deserve to be treated this poorly, potentially, but also for the Albanese government. And I think we've spoken about this before, and I made my views clear that I thought that he deserved to be disciplined, so to speak, or punished a little bit by his the track record and the handling of certain elements that I strongly disagree with, even though I did support him in his previous run. So that's the kind of general sentiment that I'm left with, and it raises some big question marks about kind of who we are as people, our place in the world, and how much of this reflections on how much of this is, a function of the Australian environment versus our response to what's going on globally.
Yeah, so to answer my own question, I think, look, I'm very anti-Trump, so I think that's...
Well, that's a shock.
If I have TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, and I project that onto this election, and I had to view the world entirely through the lens of, my TDS, it's tough living with a chronic disease, but anyway.
There's no cure, only management.
Then my TDS should be very relieved at this result, in the sense that of the political forces here in Australia, you could only really ever accuse one side of politics as being sort of Trump adjacent, if you like, and it's not the Albanese government.
Pan left to Jacinta Price.
But, MAGA, make Australia great again. But that said, I've said before, I don't think Peter Dutton was anything ever remotely like Donald Trump. I don't think the coalition as a party, being the Liberal Party and the National Party, are anything like the MAGA movement. And I think that's a bit of a bait and switch. So I think to sort of, you kind of dislike or distaste or scare for Trump. And then, all right, well, that's like the Republicans kind of like their kind of equivalent party here is like the coalition. So yeah, we should, and there's no way, I don't accept for a moment that this election result, that Trump wasn't the number one dominant factor in this election because the polls say completely the opposite, right? They're absolutely tanked for the coalition the moment Trump did his tariffs and other bullshit nonsense.
Can I
right?
ask you something, though, Andy? You mentioned that it's unfair to, refer to Dutton as Trump or whatever it is, and I would largely agree with that. But can I ask you a more direct question that says, did the party flirt with MAGA-style politics?
I think there were probably some candidates, you mentioned Jacinta Price, and there were some elements within the coalition who would have looked at Trump-style campaigning and tactics and popularism and would have been attracted to it. I think the better of their senses avoided doing that. And I think there's probably a broader right-wing kind of ecosystem of like policy positions that you could take, immigration and things like that, which they probably flirt with in the similar way. But no, I don't think you can compare the two. But what I do want to say though is just to go back to Dutton. I don't know if you saw his concession speech, but now if Peter Dutton should be remembered in public life for anything, I hope that those on the other side of politics who disagree with Peter Dutton, who think, who've labelled him Voldemort and, see him as this extreme right-wing sort of culture warrior and all that, I hope that they give him credit for his concession speech. It was very gracious. It was, he lost his seat as well in Parliament. He said, look, the new member will be a good representative for the community. He had gracious remarks for Albanese as Prime Minister. So he exits the political stage in 180 degrees opposite the way Trump did. He left graciously, and I think, I think that's where we should, look at our political system and be very glad that we've got it.
I 100% agree that I think that, people, I've heard a lot of commentary out there saying that, isn't it great that Australian politics is boring? And I don't think necessarily it's that part that I'm impressed with. It's what you mentioned. It's this idea that at the end of the day, you shake hands and you say, well, look, the sky's not falling. We had to battle it out so the best would win. And now I wish you the best. Right. And I think that is something that is vanishing from the stage of politics, the decorum of it all. And I'm very happy to see that there. And that's why, this general sense that I mentioned of melancholy around the fact that perhaps there was a bit of demonization. And, I don't think Dutton possesses any of the silver tongue elements of Trump as well, that he can deflect a lot of this negative characterization energy. It definitely didn't work that way. I do think that, like you said, certain parts of the political campaign flirted with MAGA-style movements, and that was a mistake, right? But when the market's that hot, you got to remember, it was only a few months ago that the whole world, like the whole right-wing conservative parts of the world, were just absolutely in the grips of elation, right? They're riding high. And I think these political strategists in camp, they couldn't help themselves. They was like, we've got to get some of this action. And so, they dipped their toe in and they didn't. And that's the worst part about politics, that I don't believe that Dutton and the Liberals and everything actually represent any of those elements, but they got on because they thought it was hot. And that's the problem. The winds of change and the fortunes of it changed so quickly. And now Trump's burnt at least 3 conservatives in elections, in Canada and in here and, in other areas. And I think that we'll see this keep on going. Now, I'll go back to my other point though. What I really feel like is, I feel a bit, I don't know, it's one of those moments where you start to wonder what the core of Australia is really reacting to, right? And the way that this may be taken by the Labor Party is that they, they won't learn from some of the things that I believe that they should have been punished for, like the voice, like perhaps some of the tax cut strategies and the reneging on that, and they'll double down rather than actually come into this with a refresh mandate. So the question I guess I want to ask you is, if you're Albanese right now, after all the champagne wears off, do you sit down and you say, this is a mandate to go harder, or is it a mandate to keep doing exactly what you're doing?
All right. So I'm, as I think you indicated, somewhat uncomfortable with the result as it was, because I don't think it gives the government the signal that it needed to receive from the electorate. Now, a landslide in Australian politics, I mean, they look like they're going to get more than 90 seats. out of the 150 or so in Parliament. So that is absolute. That's the widest of buffers you need to have majority government as you'll ever get in Australian politics. Now, if you look at it from that point of view, that sends a signal to the Labor Party, or could be perceived as a signal to the Labor Party. It will certainly be seen as a signal among Labor supporters and Labor agitators that they're doing the right thing and they're on a winner.
Undeserved.
And they need to double down, and they need to do more like traditional Labor value stuff. They need to do more. Now, we turned a corner in the last sort of 5 years on like some of the work stuff that we kind of like keep whinging about. No, we need more of that. We need to go back to like that's the risk. Now, I want to put some actual facts on the table here and say that if you ask me, who are some recent Labor leaders who were particularly unpopular, right, at an election, at an Australian federal election, there's two figures that come to mind. One is Mark Latham back in 2004, and the other is Kevin Rudd when he lost to Tony Abbott. So not Kevin 07, Kevin Rudd, who was very popular, but after we'd been through the the Rudd-Gillard, leadership, everyone was sick of the Labor Party by that stage, and particularly sick of Rudd at that point. And that's, it would take someone as unpopular as Rudd was at that time for Tony Abbott to win, right? So two particularly unpopular Labor leaders of recent sort of history both lost those elections, by the way. Now, both of those very unpopular Labor figures received about the same primary vote as what Albanese has just received in this landslide election. So, in fact, Mark Latham got a higher primary vote, as in these people voting for Labor as their first preference. Mark Latham actually got a higher primary vote than what Albo's got in this election. Now, Albo looks like he's got a smidgen above what Rudd got back in 2000 and, was it 2014, was it? A smidgen above. But at this stage, and like I say with all the caveats of they're still counting, but at this stage, Albo has a primary vote, or the Labor Party rather, have a primary vote of 34.7%. So that's basically 2/3 of the country didn't vote for the government. And then to give the figures for 2004, so Mark Latham actually got 37.6% of the primary vote back then, and Kevin Rudd, when he was up against Tony Abbott in 2013 rather, not 2014, he got 33.4%, so slightly below what Albo's got last night. So if you're a Labor Party supporter, get off your high horse for a moment. Don't view this as a raging success and endorsement of the government that you support, and take a step back and count your lucky stars that Donald Trump fucked it for the coalition, plus had a weak opposition leader and a poorly organised opposition party. Because if you had a better opposition leader and a better organised opposition, and you didn't have Trump, you would be a first-term government, and you would have lost. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the fragmentation, preferential, stacked voting preferences and things. But I suppose, I mean, I don't want this to become an analysis piece, right? This is meant to be our reaction to it. But you got to think that perhaps it's kind of hard maybe it's hard for people to get behind nuclear as well. I think, just traditionally having that, such a big step into the unknown, where you're spending a lot more as well, doesn't naturally appeal to some of these blue voters. I don't know. But yes, I think the Trump factor cannot be overstated, in my opinion. Look, I feel really bad in some ways that that Dutton lost his own seat as well, especially because of that cruel thing that happens when you're the leader, where you have to campaign for everyone, which often leaves little time for you to do anything in your actual electorate, to kind of kiss the babies, shake the hands, kiss the babies, make yourself a little bit more human. It's just that kind of insult, the salt in the wounds that I don't think. Yeah, like I said, there's a little bit of unjust feeling, like there's no justice in the world. But I think that you messaged something to me late last night, and I think it was the tune. I want to kind of discuss it with you for a second, because it was this idea of whether this is this idea that the Australian people have spoken versus they're just scared, right? And I want to kind of unpack that a little bit, because do you think that's what's going on? Do you think that We're just scared of anything that hints at a Trump 2.0 or a 1.2. We just get the hell away from me. Do you think that's what's really driven a lot of this? It's just become so toxic that anything that takes us further, closer to that domain is just poison.
I think a lot of the analysis leading up into the election was that there's a very high proportion of uncommitted voters. And so I don't think it's actually all true that everyone just got scared and go, oh, we'll stick with the status quo because it's better the devil you know. I don't think that's necessarily the channel through which the Trump vote came out. I think Trump was the framing mechanism for those undecided voters to decide how they want to think about this election. And the framing was, elect this guy. Okay, you in America, you have this guy, nails the talking points around things like cost of living and, criticizes the incumbent government about how, they failed at A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? Trump criticizing Biden, that is. But then gets in and has no real, actually either has some completely off the charts agenda, as Trump has, and actually can't do anything to actually solve the actual problems that he was speaking of, right? And so that's the framing that I think the Australian electorate, being the significant number of undecided voters, then went into this election. They're like, well, all right, yep, as an opposition, it's easy to talk about cost of living because you're not the one with, the hands on the levers, right? So you can frame everything as the government's fault. And the government doesn't really have good answers to that, right? The government say, we can't really do much for you. I'm afraid that's just the way it is, right? But I think when you actually have to consider, well, what are they actually proposing to do? What are their policies? What are they going to do different? And they don't have the answers. And so people then go, well, let's stick with Labor and stick with the government. Why change? Why risk change for something that we don't know what we're changing to? We don't know actually what they're going to do.
Yeah, well, that's why I also spoke about the nuclear plans, right? Because I think that is the opposite of that. I think it's a huge change, a risk into the unknown. It's hard to sell. And I don't actually know who could sell it.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I do want to talk about the Teals, though, and the independent vote, because I think it would be fair to say that the coalition lost this election, not that Labor won it. And that goes partially to the, those primary vote figures I was, rattling off before. In some ways, Labor's primary vote, it's low, but it's always been low. They've always been in that sort of, mid-30s on a good day and lower on a bad day and, maybe slightly better when they, win government. But the coalition usually get in the 40s. Certainly to win government, they need to be in the 40s. And their primary vote plummeted, right? So Dutton got about 32%. Right, so less than Labor. Now, the coalition have been just that, a coalition, right? It's a coalition of, in the formal sense, it's the Liberal Party and the National Party, right? Regional focused party and a, inner city sort of conservative / like the Tories, right? The equivalent of the Tories in the UK. That's in the formal sense. But this other word that gets bandied about in the context, particularly of the Liberal Party, is this notion of a broad church that it's actually a coalition within itself of lots of different interests, right? You've got socially conservative religious people. You've got, inner city professionals who, want lower taxes.
Yeah.
You've got people who believe in small government and the role of the individual. You've got a whole range of different people who don't necessarily share an ideology, but that know that the only way they can win government is to band together and fight Labor. And they used to do that. That was what John Howard did so successfully. And with the Teal movement, this is these, people independents who've been targeting coalition-held seats or Liberal Party-led held seats in the city areas, have done very successfully because they basically just said, well, we'll fuck off all the other bits that we don't care about, like the religious and the conservative stuff, and we'll just focus on the bit that we do care about. But what you have, and this is why I fucking can't stand the Teals, is you have this, it's such a selfish sort of approach because they're just this disparate, useless fucking seat warmers in Parliament who do nothing. They don't achieve, any outcomes. That they are so tripping over themselves to claim that they are genuine independents and not a party because they don't like the association of being connected with Simon Holmes Accord and who funds them all. Just, form a fucking party and be something, form a party and say, hey, look, we're not into religious conservative bullshit, but when push comes to shove, we're not gonna we're not going to like side with Labor, and like we're going to be a genuine opposition for your community. So, and they haven't done that, and it's this disintegration of the coalition that I think actually could have legacy or generational impacts on Australian politics.
Yeah, it's that fragmentation, I think, of leaving the broad church, as you say. I mean, are the inner city people to blame, though, right? Like, I think, isn't this just giving them what they want? They want the sugar hit of doing something for climate change, but they still want their tax cuts. Like, I mean, isn't this democracy in action, as flawed as it is?
Well, it clearly is. I mean, they voted for them, but this happened to Labor in the 60s, I think. The split of the Labor Party, right? So you had the Democratic Labor Party and the Labor Party proper. And they were out of government for a generation as a result. And it's not a good thing because it basically gives the government the keys to do whatever they like, and or even just to sit and do nothing. Like, because everyone thinks that when you have a big majority, that the next, like, the obvious thing you're going to go and do is you're going to do all this wild, crazy shit. Sometimes, like, governments that have a big majority, they just do more of nothing because you can get away with it. And like, don't forget the people who have now entered Parliament as, you know, in seats where they probably shouldn't be the member. So, you know, they're like Labor members of Parliament in seats that are pretty much right-wing seats. They're going to be lobbying their leaders to, no, don't do anything. Like, let's just do nothing because we want to hang on to our seats, right? So now there's like broader coalition of people within the party they've got to maintain, like, keep happy, right? So sometimes it's actually a recipe for just doing nothing and nothing good happens.
That was my question to Andy, whether, if I'm Albanese, does this majority, this electoral fat, if you will, embolden me to chase after something a bit more legacy worthy? Because part of the dissatisfied feeling that I'm left with is that Albo got in on a small target strategy, right? And it's kind of more of the same. Like, nothing has really happened. We had a chat about it a few episodes ago. We couldn't collectively come up with anything that they've really done. And what's even worse, what's the plan going forward? You can't tell me, all right? And that's disheartening, all right? And I understand the nature on when there's turbulent times, you become risk adverse. But I don't accept that that's the only thing that's happening here. I think, like you said, is the fragmentation. I think similarly in the US, where the Republican Party was in real trouble as well. It's like, what do we stand for? What do we do? We've stripped out all the moderates. So we have to bet on an extreme right MAGA or nothing. And maybe, this is our version of that it's like, well, that wasn't a good gamble, and we didn't have the stomach to execute that right anyway, to be a full right MAGA, make Australia great again. And it was never going to work because of our population base and where we are. So what does the coalition stand for in the future? And how do they put up a challenge? How do they recover? How do they pick up the pieces?
So I think ultimately this will come down to leadership, right? If Labor want to demonstrate leadership, they've got to say, look, we're going to do some things. We're going to take some political risks. A lot of people talk about productivity. Like, productivity is like the buzzword, right? We need reform and all this stuff. Like, honestly, like, reform of the Australian economy will mean it will mean doing things which people, certainly on the Labor side of politics, don't feel comfortable doing. It'll be things like deregulating, stopping government from, getting in the way of free enterprise. It'll be let's stop pursuing all of these, social causes, like all of these objectives that are popular with our base, by making small businesses and other businesses do all the groundwork for us. Like, and that's how you're going to have dynamism. That's it. Like, even in industrial relations, like, they've moved us back to like 80s level era sort of industrial relations policies. Like, these are not going to be popular with their base. So I don't think they're going to do that. And tax reform is difficult. We haven't had proper tax reform in this country since the GST. So, and Howard almost lost government trying. So I do want to, what next for the coalition? Because they've probably got the bigger identity crisis.
Yeah, I agree.
For the coalition, I actually want to bring you into just a little Facebook comment, thread that I read after last night's very astounding loss for the coalition. So the exchange went something like this: the experiment, I won't say who's saying this, but the experiment where the Liberals tried to be a centre-left party didn't work well. So that's reflecting on Dutton being a centre-left party, which I'm pretty sure many people would disagree with. A comment to that. Has it ever worked? No, yet here we are. What's your take on that?
Look, I do think the identity challenge is tough.
Should they go further right wing?
Well, you've got to believe that you need to bring, the sensible thing would be that you're going to bring the moderates back, right? But is that even possible anymore? And due to some of the elements we're speaking about, the fragmentation and everything, globally, right to centre has had to move further right to get it done. And that's something that we don't want to see here, but I don't think there's an obvious answer. I don't think there's an obvious answer, actually, because if the Labor government is willing to sit and manage from the middle and not do really anything but kind of just not provide any weak holes in their armour, you're going to have to do something radical, right? Like, I think now it's kind of, it's the Monaco GP and there's not room to overtake, and Labor can go as slow as they want in front and just block them, right, by playing it safe. So it's actually really tough. I don't know. You're going to need maybe a once-in-a-generation political force, potentially, like have a real someone who is charismatic. I don't know. I actually really don't know. You have thoughts?
Well, I think they've got to rebuild the coalition, the broad-based, broad church coalition for sustained, ongoing success. But I think the subtext to that kind of commentary isn't that, they need to go more MAGA and they need to go more right-wing and extreme or whatever to capture, everyone left of them somehow.
Sounded like it.
But I think if I can be generous to what I think they're really trying to say, and I think there's probably some credence to this, is that the coalition or the Liberal Party or whoever, they need to stand for something. They need to be able to sell to the community their vision, whatever that is, and they need to passionately believe it, and they all need to be on the same page, and they need to convince the rest of us why you shouldn't have sex before marriage. And until they can do that, they're not going to win.
There's already a party for that. But I think that, to be fair, though, Andy, that if you're looking at what each party stands for, I still think the stronger part is coming from the coalition, in terms of concrete things that they want to do that will change things in Australia. I don't think you can say so much of the same for the Labor government.
Well, I'm not sure that's true. I think maybe historically, I think under Howard, the coalition could say, no, we believe in your rights your ability as an individual to.
That baby can definitely swim.
You can work it out yourself, and we're going to help you. We're going to be your supporter and partner. We don't want you to be dependent on us, but we're going to give you the tools you need and give you the right conditions to succeed and thrive. And we're going to govern for the whole of Australia, not just our people, right? I think Labor's message is that we're just the sensible party that can deliver responsible government. And I think that's what Howard owned that message back in when he was in for, however many years. So
we're only one pink bats away from a scandal. Don't worry.
Well, what I mean? The last coalition government wasn't a coherent, story of responsibility either, right? You had 3 prime ministers, you had quite a few mishaps and all that. So anyways, all right, well, I think we'll call it a day. Any final thoughts?
I don't know. I think it's a red panty night for Penny Wong. That's all I can say. We'll leave it as that.
All right, over and out.